Francis Castiglione was born in New York City within the borough of Queens. At a young age, he fell in love with a woman named Maria and married her. She was pregnant when he decided to join the United States Marine Corps. During his time in the Marines, Francis was trained in a wide array of skills from survival to guerrilla combat. Upon completion of his training, Castiglione was deployed into Vietnam. Francis served honorably, earning multiple awards including 2 Purple Hearts and a Presidential Medal of Freedom. After 2 tours in the Vietnam War, Francis returned home and fathered his second child with Maria. But something in Francis could not leave the war behind. He changed his name to Frank Castle and illegally re-entered the Marines, serving a 3rd tour in Vietnam. After the war ended, Frank continued to serve, training special ops recruits in the upper New York State area. For a time, he was happy, until he had a very bad day. While on leave from work, Frank took his family to visit Central Park. The family had the bad luck of accidentally coming across a mob killing. Fearing witnesses, the criminals slaughtered Frank's family. But Castle survived. He tried to get the mobsters arrested, but the corrupt NYPD had deep connections with the mafia and refused to do anything. Castle couldn't let things go. The event and the memories of his family would forever haunt him. Deciding the only proper way to avenge his loved ones was by physically destroying the criminals responsible. The mafia, drug cartels, street gang, muggers, killers, rapists, psychopaths, pedophiles. Everyone was a target, and everybody had to die. He adopted the iconic skull symbol to represent the death he would bring to his foes. He abandoned everything and began a one-man war on crime. He became the Punisher. Frank developed a vast network of hideouts and armories containing a wide variety of weaponry, ranging from conventional firearms to highly advanced tools of war. He even began gathering superhero and villain technology. And thus began Frank's never-ending war. Using his military training, Castle began hunting criminals while training himself in detective work to find the guilty. He became highly familiar with the operations and methodology of criminals, using this knowledge to predict their actions, and began to earn a reputation as one of the most feared vigilantes in the Marvel Universe. Frank's behavior meant he was never short on enemies. Castle constantly found himself at odds with endless waves of assassins, bounty hunters, and mercenaries, all specifically hired to kill him. Most died at Frank's hands. Pursued by criminals and cops alike, Frank remained highly mobile. He traveled all over the world, continuing his mission everywhere he went. Though many members of law enforcement were reluctant to pursue Frank, disapproving of his methods but believing he is making the world a better place, Castle's eventually developed tendency to even kill corrupt cops often provoked police forces into action. The Punisher would thus regularly find himself in prison, usually at Rikers Island. Incarcerated, Castle will be surrounded by his enemies and lacking the means to defend himself. With corrupt guards willing to look the other way, many inmates would go after the Punisher, seeking reward or prestige for killing the increasingly legendary vigilante. Though Castle was outnumbered and unarmed, time and time again, Frank would astound and frighten everyone by routinely killing his attackers with ease. Over time, inmates began to fear him, and the attacks became rare. Sooner or later, the Punisher always escapes to resume his war. Both in and out of prison, Frank stuck to a strict if not fanatical protocol, constantly training and taking care of his body, while focusing solely on his mission. Every waking moment was dedicated to this endless, eternal war. Early on in his career, Frank had a run-in with Spider-Man. The vast differences in how these two treated criminals led to many moments of conflict throughout their respective careers, but at times they have set aside their differences to work together. This uneasy and tentative alliance would be the norm for how Frank regularly worked with other superheroes, often experiencing tense relationships with other vigilantes who did not share his philosophy or desire to kill criminals. As such, he would find himself at odds with heroes like Daredevil, Captain America, or Moon Knight, who have complicated relations with Frank to say the least. These complicated relationships were often defined by either conflict or the need to form temporary alliances in order to serve a greater good. In fact, the single most embarrassing moment of the Punisher's career came at the hands of the superpowered group of children called the Runaways, who were once planning to make a deal with the Kingpin. When he tried to stop the kids from doing this, he was stopped by a single punch from the 12-year-old mutant named Molly Hayes. This young girl, whose powers gave her immense strength, almost knocked Frank unconscious with this act. The strike incapacitated Frank instantly, but he refused to collapse out of pride. He did not pursue the children any further. Supervillains, on the other hand, were a different story. Viewing them as no different from any other criminal, Castle would often kill these villains without hesitation. As such, unlike superheroes who often develop rogues gallery of villains, lifelong enemies who pose an ever-present threat, most of Frank's opponents are long dead. One villain stands in contrast to this, a severely scarred man named Jigsaw. Jigsaw was disfigured by the Punisher and has fixated on getting revenge against Frank, and has concocted many schemes over the years to do this, all aimed at ruining his nemesis. He has framed Castle for murdering innocent people on multiple occasions and tried to kill Frank through various means, remaining a constant thorn in the Punisher's side. Unlike most of Frank's enemies, the serial killer has an uncanny knack for survival. The Punisher is also regularly thought villains commonly associated with other heroes, and they tend to have a better chance of survival than the average criminal, often giving Castle an unusually high level of challenge compared to his usual cases. These enemies include figures like Bullseye, the Kingpin, and once even Dr. Doom. At one point, the grief and trauma of his family finally got to him, and Frank committed suicide. However, he was resurrected by the forces of heaven, becoming a supernatural figure with glowing eyes, an arcane symbol on his forehead, and mystical weaponry. The Punisher began a new mission for heaven. This did not last long, as he gradually regained memories of his past life and decided to reject Heaven's mission, at which point he returned to normal. When the Superhero Registration Act was passed, the superpowered community dissolved into civil war. Castle became an uneasy ally of Captain America and the rebellious Secret Avengers, after Tony Stark began recruiting villains to fight on behalf of superhero registration. Frank did manage to help the team, rescuing Spider-Man, gaining valuable intelligence by infiltrating the Baxter Building, but his time on the anti-registration team was short. When two villains offered their services to Captain America, the Punisher gunned them down in cold blood. Steve Rogers flew into a rage at this, viciously beating Frank and throwing him off the team. So Frank went back to his usual work after this, kicking off his return by blowing up a funeral some villains were holding for the recently deceased Stiltman. Meanwhile, Norman Osborn became head of S.H.I.E.L.D. after it appeared to the world that he stopped a Skrull invasion. Redesigning S.H.I.E.L.D. into a new agency known as Hammer, Norman began using his new power to further his own needs, while quietly filling the Avengers roster with known villains. As such, Frank attempted to assassinate Osborn. He was nearly able to kill the man, but the powerful hero known as the Sentry was able to stop the bullet. Frank escaped but earned Norman's attention, who tasked the villain known as the Hood with killing him. Knowing Castle's reputation, the Hood decided he couldn't do this alone, and summoned villains back from the dead, and ordered them to kill the Punisher. These efforts ultimately failed. As a result, Norman dispatched Wolverine's son, Daken, and dozens of Hammer agents to finish the job. After years of surviving enemy after enemy, Frank finally met his match with the brutal son of Logan. The mutant won the fight, slaughtering the Punisher, and slicing him into pieces. However, Frank's story does not end here. The remains of his body were gathered by Moloids and the Man-Thing on behalf of the vampire Morbius and a team of mystical superheroes known as the Legion of Monsters. Morbius was able to resurrect the Punisher as a patchwork creature colloquially referred to as Franken Castle. Eventually, he came around to the Legion and worked with them to protect monsters inhabiting an underground city known as the Monster Metropolis. At one point, Castle's work with the Legion led him to Tokyo, where he had an encounter with Daken. Though he was able to take revenge against the villain, he was unable to kill him after the battle was interrupted by Wolverine, another hero Frank has a rather complicated relationship with. At the end of his work with the Legion, he was restored to human form thanks to the formidable powers of a man named Ulysses Bloodstone. Frank resumed his war, coming into conflict with enemies such as the Hood, Jigsaw, and a sinister ninja organization known as the Hand. One day, a violent gang war started by a group called the Exchange led to the deaths of 30 people at a wedding, including the groom. The bride, Marine Sergeant Rachel Cole Alves, was left widowed only hours after being married. Frank Castle used connections he had within the police to track down some of the killers before he was badly injured by the Vulture, losing an eye in the process. Spending the next 3 months recovering, Frank returned to his work only to find Rachel staying at a hotel where some Exchange members were meeting, using her Marine training to hunt down and kill members of the Exchange. Though they worked together to kill the criminals staying at the hotel, Frank was reluctant to take on an ally like this, admitting he doesn't think other people should do what he does. He was also concerned that Rachel would put herself or others in danger due to her emotions. He forced her to prove her loyalty, conviction, and ability to suppress her feelings by burning a photo of her wedding. After doing so, they went after the heads of the exchange. They were successful in these assassinations, but Rachel accidentally killed a police detective in the process. Mired with grief and forced to go on the run, Rachel attempted suicide only to be captured and imprisoned for her crimes. She was sentenced to death. Spider-Man got wind of this and contacted the Avengers, worried that Castle was out of control and needed to be taken care of. But Wolverine refused to help his fellow Avengers, not viewing Frank's actions as immoral, and believing lethal force is sometimes necessary. As the rest of the Avengers pursued Frank around the world, Logan decided to help Castle instead, and worked with him to break Rachel out of prison. Wolverine managed to get Rachel to safety, while Frank stayed behind to battle the Avengers and buy the two some time. Castle was captured by the heroes and put into an underwater prison specifically designed by Iron Man to keep Frank away from the other prisoners, while Rachel embraced the mission of the Punisher, beginning her own career of killing criminals in Los Angeles. As always, incarceration couldn't keep Frank away forever. The Red Hulk used his contacts within the government to recruit Frank into the latest iteration of the Thunderbolts, joining Agent Venom, Elektra, Deadpool, and eventually even Ghost Rider. The Thunderbolts began clandestine missions to further the Red Hulk's agenda. In exchange, each member of the team was able to use the Thunderbolts to complete personal missions of their own design. Frank accepted this offer, serving on the team well and relishing in the opportunity to use his personal mission to kill some mobsters he was unable to handle alone. During this time, Frank sparked a largely sexual relationship with Elektra, while developing a heated rivalry with Deadpool. The team eventually disbanded and Frank resumed his war on crime alone. He began operating in Los Angeles until he was recruited by Nick Fury to investigate the murder of Uatu the Watcher. Frank was one of the candidates selected by Fury to succeed him as a secret protector of Earth, but he was not chosen for this role. Later, the Incursion Crisis brought about the end of the world. The Kingpin set up a viewing party to watch the final battle between the Ultimate and Prime Marvel universes, inviting many other villains to join it. Frank tracked down the location of the party and killed them all. After this, the Howling Commandos recruited the Punisher for one more mission before the end of the world. Frank was taken to the headquarters of a terrorist group called Black Dawn. He massacred the team but was badly injured in the process. As the world crumbled around him, Frank died from the gunshot wounds, without a single regret in the world. His story does not end here. The Prime Universe was restored, and Frank has resumed his mission. Many alternate versions of the Punisher exist in different timelines, universes, and stories. There are too many to discuss them all here, but these are some of the more notable characters. In the mainstream Marvel 616 universe, other people have been inspired by the Punisher's actions and taken out the mantle as well, like Rachel Cole Alves and Lynn Michaels. In Spider-Gwen's universe, Frank Castle is a zealous police detective known for his brutal methods, who comes into conflict with Gwen Stacy after being led to believe she is working with this world's Kingpin. There's also an interesting alternate universe where it was Frank Castle who was killed instead of his family, and as a result, the Castle family becomes a group of Punishers in an effort to avenge Frank. The Ultimate Frank Castle led a similar life to his mainstream counterpart until he was captured by Captain America and became a member of a Black Ops team known as the Avengers. Forced into this role by Black Widow and the government, the Avengers went up against the Ultimate Ghost Rider. They failed to capture this version of John Blaze. Frank later wound up involved in a conflict between the Ultimates and the Avengers, and during this battle, he took a shot at Captain America in an attempt to immobilize the man. Instead, the Ultimate Peter Parker dove into the way of Frank's bullet and was hit. This eventually contributed to the death of the young man. Horrified he had shot a young boy, the Ultimate Frank Castle was despondent and begged S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to punish him as he had punished so many others before. When the Ultimate Universe was destroyed, the Ultimate Punisher found himself in the Kingdom of Manhattan. There he encountered a version of the 616 Punisher and killed him. Later on in this story, the Ultimate Punisher is also killed by the Thors. In another universe, Frank's family was killed during a battle between the superheroes and the Skrulls. Upon seeing his family dead and being provoked by callous comments from the superheroes watching the grieving man, Frank went into a rage and attacked the heroes, killing 3 of them. This action eventually spiraled out of control until Frank became this world's Punisher, who went on to kill practically every major superhero and villain of the Marvel Universe. In a different world, Venom possessed the Punisher, but Frank's incredible strength of will gave him control over the symbiote. Together, the two became the new Punisher. As with most Marvel characters, numerous zombie versions of Frank Castle have appeared over the years. In the Marvel Knights 2099 continuity, Frank had a daughter with Elektra. She was named Cassandra Castle, and she took on her father's mission in his honor. When Cassandra was diagnosed with cancer, she began to train her son, a young man named Franklin, to become the next Punisher. However, her son opted not to accept this when Cassandra died, ending the family's legacy once and for all. A samurai version of the Punisher also exists in the Five Ronin story. There, the Punisher was known as Akagi. Oh, and in one universe, the Punisher teamed up with Eminem. No, I am not kidding. That happened. Frank Castle has also appeared in many movies, video games, and television shows. Aside from 3 separate movies made about the character, he's also slated to appear in Netflix's Daredevil Season 2, where he will be portrayed by Jon Bernthal. Frank Castle is famous for not possessing any powers of his own, but he does have a vast array of skills. He received a great deal of training as a Marine, including military discipline, interrogation, tactics, reconnaissance, hand-to-hand combat, explosives, and firearms. Frank is also an expert-level pilot, having been trained by the Army to operate helicopters. He's also used his time as the Punisher to further his training, and has become adept at infiltration, detective work, and espionage. Though Frank is vulnerable to injury or disease like any other human, he has developed an extreme tolerance to pain from sustaining so many injuries over the years. This effect is furthered by his ongoing policy to avoid using painkillers, as he finds these drugs dull his senses and slow his reflexes. On this basis, Frank also refuses to indulge in alcohol or other recreational drugs. Through his training, a carefully planned diet, and strict exercise regimen, Frank has maximized his abilities as a human. His level of strength, speed, and endurance is at the peak of what is possible for a normal person without powers. To operate effectively, Frank has built a vast network of safe houses and vehicles, and possesses many fake identities and bank accounts. The most commonly used vehicle by the Punisher is his famous battle van, a heavily armored, carefully customized, and well-armed vehicle to assist Frank in his war on crime. His uniform is made of Kevlar and is resistant, but not immune, to most gunfire and trauma. The skull on his outfit is not only used for intimidation, but to also draw fire to the most protected area of his uniform. The Punisher is also very experienced at using a vast arsenal of weapons. He collects guns from his victims and abroad, and thus has countless conventional firearms at his disposal. Many of his weapons are personally customized with attachments ranging from simple scopes and optics to highly sophisticated and powerful equipment like special ammunition and grenade launchers. The Punisher also possesses rubber bullets, which he has reluctantly agreed to use when working alongside heroes like Spider-Man or Captain America, who object to lethal ordnance. Frank has also collected gear from many superheroes and villains. Among such items in his arsenal are PIM particles, a modified Goblin glider, pumpkin bombs, and he even once managed to steal a prototype version of Iron Man's armor. The Punisher has gone through extensive psychological training and conditioning, and as such has a high degree of resistance to psychic and telepathic abilities. Though Frank has killed many people, and even admits he doesn't think other people should take up his cause, he has no remorse for his actions and doesn't have a shred of guilt over the people he has killed. This was proven when Frank faced down Ghost Rider's penance stare without even flinching. Frank briefly had an array of supernatural powers when he was resurrected by the angels. These abilities included immortality, a healing factor, and the ability to create mystical guns. When he was Frankencastle, the Punisher had superhuman strength and immunity to telepathy and biological weaponry. Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and this is my origins and bio for the Punisher. Well, now this was a fun video to make. It felt like a great time to talk about the Punisher in light of his upcoming major role in Netflix's Season 2 of Daredevil. Frank Castle is an excellent character, and realistically one of my all-time favorites in the comic book world. He has a relatively simple premise, and his violent sense of justice leads to some pretty great stories. While other heroes often grapple with the merits of killing, the Punisher has never shied away from doing what he feels is necessary, and it's an interesting change of pace. As such, over the years this guy gained many fans. I think it's a relatively simple premise of the Punisher's character that makes him excellent fodder for many stories, because the simplicity lends itself well to interpretation. Letting the writers and artists take this character in all sorts of crazy ways is often very fun. I can't really count how many cool Punisher stories I have read as a fan and in preparation of this video, but the range of their tone and content really do speak to this character's flexibility. If you'd like to see more of the Punisher, a few recommendations do come to mind in the comic book world. Franklin Castle has to be one of the most wildest ideas I came across in all of this, but its beautiful art and excellent creativity make it by far the best story I read in preparation for this video. The out-of-continuity Punisher Max comics were great, and I also recommend you check those out. Punisher's early appearance in the Spider-Man comics were also a lot of fun and very cool to read. And I really liked his role in the Thunderbolts story. In my opinion, it's one of the Punisher's best stories in a team setting. By the way, the stuff with the Punisher working for the Angels was kinda nutty. Honestly, that's a whole other thing. It was fascinating to read, if only to see how crazy it was, but I'd be loath to call those stories good. Just the same, I think it's really interesting that the story I liked the least and the story I liked the most were also the two craziest stories out of all of this. It gets into that thing I was saying about flexibility. They can do some really cool stuff with the Punisher's character, and, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Interestingly, when I was making this video, I came across a small crowd of writers and fans who really don't like the Punisher. And I mean they really don't like him. The most prominent figure among this group is actually Joss Whedon of Avengers fame. He has criticized the Punisher before and has some choice moments with the character in the Runaways comics. It's interesting to say the least. From what I read, Whedon seems to object to the idea of the Punisher being viewed as a hero, thinking it's impossible over the years that the Punisher hasn't accidentally killed innocent people and that he's just a bad guy overall, a non-traditional hero, if you can call him that kids really shouldn't look up to. In his eyes, Frank isn't cool so much as a homicidal lunatic. And I don't totally disagree with this sentiment. After all, this is how most of the superhero community kind of views the Punisher. But that's what I like about the character in the first place. He's not a superhero, and I think it's wrong to look at him that way. Even calling him an anti-hero doesn't feel right. I've always seen him as sort of a neutral force in the Marvel Universe when it comes to morality. He kills criminals, not because he thinks it makes him a good person or that it even satisfies some lofty philosophical goal. It's his mission, this is who he is, this is what he does. Frank doesn't really grapple with the morality of his actions, he just acts. And honestly, I don't think he minds the idea that he's probably killed innocent people along the way. They haven't really touched on this too much in the comics, as far as I can tell. But after reading all these Punisher stories, my interpretation is that he'd reason he's always done everything he can to go after the guilty. And if some innocent people died along the way, well, in Frank's eyes, he's fighting a war. War has collateral damage. And we, as the readers, are left to our own devices to make up our minds about how we feel about this and what we think of this character. I like that as a reader. I enjoy morally gray material and stuff left for the reader to contemplate. I think it makes for compelling reading, and nowhere is this more obvious when we see the Punisher butt heads with other heroes, as he very often does. It's one of the reasons I'm really excited for this whole Daredevil thing with the Punisher. I think that's where the Punisher is at his best, because he works well as a comparison to other heroes, and how these other heroes conceptualize morality relative to the extremes Frank Castle takes. You always know when you're reading a comic and Frank shows up that things are about to get interesting in any given story. He brings a promise of menace, danger, and epic shootouts. He's a great character, and I'm glad I was able to make this video. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. If you'd like to see a full list of our origins and bios, be sure to check them out on our website. You can find the link to comicisland.org in the video description below. Also, if you're watching this video in March 2016, we're doing a free giveaway of a rare Funko Pop. It's free to enter the contest simply by following the instructions in the video description. And finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.